What inspired you to start producing music?
Couldn't afford a fucking studio.
It was I don't know. I started about 7 or 8 years ago. I think now it's gone amazingly quickly. I used to record my old band back in the day. It was a long time ago, and sort of got a really small recording setup just to record, basically to record the songs, and then I started recording local bands in the studio over the weekends when I was at school years ago. That's really what kickstarted it. Now I just focus all the efforts on Silent Descent, I guess.
And how did you learn your skills?
I think it was just trial and error mostly. Just sort of, I learnt a lot from. There's a guy called Andy Sneap he's a big metal producer, and he's got a forum online, and there's so much information on there. It's crazy. There's quite a lot of big name producers that post on there, and I learnt so much just from reading through the posts on that. I think that's where I learnt most of the production techniques for Duplicity.
That's bloody good. What do you think's different about producing trance metal to other genres?
It's so difficult to get everything to sit in the mix because the synths get in the way of the vocals and the guitars because they're all fighting for the middle range. And unless you have to cut all the bass out of the synths straight away just because you can't keep it in because it just becomes really muddy. And you need to try and octave up the synths as much as you can just to keep them out of the way. And then the rest of it's just similar to mixing a normal metal band, really.
Yeah.
It's only the extra synths which you have to factor in.
Do you guys have any advice to give our viewers when writing riffs?
Learn the drums.
The drums?
That's the most important thing I'd say. Back in the past I didn't know anything about drums, and I tried to write riffs and it just never really ended up sounding anything like what I wanted it to. And when I picked up the basics of drums and how to syncopate the bass drum with the guitar chugs and different beats you can do, it made writing riffs like 10 times easier.
Wow.
And especially once you know how to record program drums and then record the guitar along to the drums on the computer, it makes writing 10 times easier.
That's a good piece of advice. Do you guys use mostly software or hardware or both?
For our first album, for Duplicity, we pretty much used hardware. We used the microKORG for most of the synth sounds.
Lovely little synth.
But recently we switched over pretty much exclusively to software synths.
Cool.
It's a lot easier to do because you don't have to worry about playing anything in or running it back out through the hardware. You can just tweak it at any point on the MIDI. It stays there forever, which is really useful if you want to make some last minute tweaks.
So what kind of software synths do you use?
We use the Cakewalk Zeta a lot. I think that's the one that Pendulum use for their bass sounds, and it's got some nice bass sounds on there. There's also quite a lot of good leads and arpeggios on there which are good. We use East West Symphonic Orchestra Gold for our string sounds, which is really realistic sounding orchestral synth. Actually, it's all real samples. It's all been recorded in a real orchestral hall, and it's very realistic. So I recommend that.
Yeah,
it's not cheap, but it's very good piece of software.
Cool. What else do you use? Do you use Cubase or?
Yeah, we do our recording in Cubase as our main sequencer, and then we put our drums through Battery 2 and Easy Drummer, and that's our kind of basic setup.
What do you use Easy Drummer for then? Is it more the top end?
We use pretty much Easy Drummer just for the cymbals.
Yeah.
Because I found it a little bit more realistic than using samples because they've got all the velocities preset and everything, and it's all a lot more realistic. Whereas we use drum samples for the actual hits of the drums.
I think everything can be software these days.
I think everything can be software, yeah, definitely.
Can't wait till you can get software guitars.
Imagine that.
So where do you guys find your samples?
We don't find them from Warner Brothers movies.
The drum samples are by a guy called Stephen Slate. I think he manufactures samples for all the big name studios at the moment. He's got some really nice sounding kicks and snares, so we use them for our main drum samples. And we use for our toms. We normally use the Chimera tom samples that were used in their album a couple of years ago now, which Andy Sneap put up on his forum for free for people to use, and they sound pretty nice. So we've been using them. So them combined with the Slate samples and the Easy Drummer cymbals, we've got quite a decent drum sound.
How do you keep your mixes so crisp and punchy?
I think most of it's due to compression. We use parallel compression on the drums, so we run it as a send as opposed to an insert, meaning that it basically effectively doubles up the sound and really brings it forward. For the trancey bits, we use sidechain compression, which mutes all the other tracks, not mutes but reduces the other tracks while the kicks come through. That's it. So it really cuts through. But we don't use it much in metal because it's not really appropriate, but for trance certainly.
Are there any other techniques that you use? Like how important do you think EQing is?
EQ is very important. Keeping everything with its own place in the spectrum, and not having too much overlap is the most important thing, because you can't have different instruments fighting for the same frequencies.
What kind of frequencies do you use for your guitars then?
Normally we just have them sort of in the mid high range, and then we have the bass doing the low end. We take out all the low end from guitars,
Okay.
just so it doesn't get in the way of the bass. Have the guitars filling up the mid and high.
What's the most common misconception you find beginner producers have?
That double tracking is record something once, copy and paste it.
Oh yeah. If you can't hear something, turn up the volume. Whereas that's completely the wrong thing to do. It's normally can be done with EQ. To get things to be heard, you don't want to use volume. You want to use other techniques.
What's the most important lesson you've learned as a producer?
Right. Yeah. I'd say having a good guitar. If you're recording guitars, having a good high quality guitar amp is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because I used to record guitars through all sorts of different cheap amps and couldn't for the life of me figure out why. Never sounded anywhere near as good as I wanted it to.
Yeah.
And I got my hands on a PV6505, and ever since then it's just been so much nicer recording guitars. You can plug it in. The mic position is still important, but no, generally, as long as you've got it vaguely in the right direction, it's going to sound good, whatever. Having a good guitar amp for recording guitars is essential.
Probably the cheapest one as well, out of all the good modern
so
high amp.
there's the Mesa Boogies and the Angels and stuff. It's just like, this is the cheapest one, and it sounds in my opinion, it sounds as good as them.
If you could produce a track with anyone in music, who would it be and why?
I think I'd probably say Rob Swire from Pendulum, because he's been a huge influence to everything I've done. He's someone I'd really like to meet and would really like to work with at some point.
What about you, Jago?
Rolf Harris.
How do you get such awesome sounding drums from a home studio?
I think you got to keep the cymbals quite low in the mix. Keep them just so they're just sitting there in the background and not really getting in the way of anything. And get the kick and the snare really punchy using compression and parallel compression, definitely.
And good samples.
And good samples, yeah, that's the most important thing. You can't fix something if it's broken to begin with. You need some really high quality samples and then bring them to the front. But the toms, because they're not using the main beats, they're less important for in terms of the overall mix. But obviously you still want to get some nice samples and still want to get them nice and sort of prominent.
What instruments do you play?
I play guitar, I used to play bass, and I used to play piano as well. And I do a lot of singing as well.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to learn drums at the moment as well, but I'm not.
And how useful do you think it is knowing those instruments when producing?
The more you know about instruments, the easier it becomes. It's especially, as I said, with the drums. If you know drums and you're recording guitar and bass, it makes it 10 times easier. And having a sort of rough music theory background as well through having piano lessons, it's made songwriting a lot easier. Even though I do everything by ear, but it's still good to have the knowledge there.
Yeah. So how did you guys learn to play instruments? And you said you had piano lessons, but like guitar, how did you learn that?
I think guitar. I mean, with the piano, I lost interest because I was playing music at the time I didn't really enjoy, and I don't enjoy sheet music either, reading sheet music. So that kind of put me off. But when it came to guitar, I was playing songs that I really liked, and I understood I could read tab really well. And
so you taught yourself by tab on internet?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and then once you start getting in bands and things, it really escalates quite quickly.